Joining me now is Jelani Cobb, staff writer for The New Yorker and dean of Columbia University School of Journalism. David Cay Johnston, author of The Big Cheat and founder of DCReport.org. And Tom Nichols, staff writer for The Atlantic. I am going to start with you, Jelani. I always like to say it's good to have a historian around, and you are a good one, and also the head of a very important journalism school. You also live in New York. I think you and I was born in Brooklyn, can confirm that no, that is not the way New Yorkers talk. New Yorkers just don't cite Hitlerian speech casually, right? Am I right about that?
Yeah, I think that's that's about as common in New York as the so-called locker room talk from the video we heard before. I've never heard anybody use those words in a locker room. I've never heard anyone in New York use those words referring to immigrants. It's a very kind of dystopian rhetoric, a worldview that is probably more akin to screenplay writers than it is typically to sober-minded political figures. And I do want to add one thing here, which is, journalistically speaking, I covered the Tree of Life shooting. I was there. I went to Pittsburgh to cover it. I wrote about the Tops shooting in Buffalo. And I wrote about the El Paso Walmart shooting, where 23 people were killed. And in each of those instances, it was that same sort of rhetoric. And this is no kind of partisan dig at a particular. Anyone who looks at the kind of weaponized rhetoric that we saw in those manifestos would see that that there's a very clear parallel between that kind of language and those kinds of actions.
And just to stay with you for just one moment, because the history of journalism in this country, including the New York Times and others, I have the big screenshots of it, is that in the 1930s, when Hitler himself was making these kinds of claims and saying these things and praising Henry Ford, who Donald Trump has also repeatedly praised for having great bloodlines. He's praised him, and Hitler praised Henry Ford, and Trump has as well. The media largely ignored it and brushed it off as light talk, not important, not dispositive of anything. No, and that was a mistake, was it not?
Oh, yeah, we have a very long tradition of rounding the absurd down into normalcy or near normalcy. Or euphemizing, the most dangerous things that we see in front of us, because we are not, we're congenitally opposed to sensationalism, at least the serious media is. But what that often does is leave you ill-equipped to report on things that are in their own right alarming and sensational. And so that's the kind of thing where we've seen, I think we've gone through racially charged and all the other various euphemisms that we've heard along those lines. But that is absolutely true. And it remains a kind of danger as we think about how we're going to cover the events leading into next year's election.
Yeah. And Tom Nichols, it also is dangerous because there is an unwillingness to see the parallels. Viktor Orban, people like Vladimir Putin, we now have Milei in Argentina. I could go on. There are a number of these autocrats who say some of the same things. We're going to unleash the police to fight drug dealers, shoot them in the street, to provoke violence. But this particular piece, this idea of immigrants poisoning the blood of the nation, is always about non-white immigrants supposedly poisoning white people and essentially the fear of intermixing, which Viktor Orban has been very overt and blatant about. What do you make of the fact that Republicans in this country refuse to see the parallels when Donald Trump says it?
They don't refuse to see the parallels. They refuse to admit the parallels. They see the parallel. They know exactly what's happening. The idea that they are in denial, the clips you showed, people like Lindsey Graham, it's not that they can't see it. It's that they prefer to stay in power. They want to win. They are basically now a minority rule party, and they're determined to stay there. And so they have to explain it away. And it may well be that Trump, has never read. I mean, the first time I heard vermin, I said, there's no way Donald Trump can come up with, his vocabulary is so limited. But that's even scarier because it says that the people around him are not just enabling him. We keep using those terms. They are actively arming him with words like this. They are actively working on these plans. It's not like he's saying things and they're saying, well, boy, we're really, I'm sorry the boss wants to go in that direction, but I guess I'll have to write that speech now. I think it's the other way around. They know exactly what he wants to do, and they're making him better at it. They learned their lessons from the last time around, and this time they're going to make sure that he's a lot more focused and a lot more intent on getting things done right on, to use his term, right on day one.
Well, let's talk that. Let's talk Trump, David K. Johnson. You've known this man for 25 some odd years and covered him. Donald Trump seems to me, I mean, just my sort of cursory history of him when I was writing my book on him, is that he is obsessed with blood purity. He is obsessed with genes and his good genes. These are the things that he says all the time. It's just that people didn't attach any nefarious intent to it, not sure why. But is he as obsessed with blood poisoning and blood and genes and good genes and all of that as I think he is?
Oh, absolutely. You absolutely have nailed it right there. What should trouble us the most, Joy, is how many millions of people buy into this nonsense that if you have pink skin like me, somehow you're better. What a silly, ridiculous notion. And we really, I think, are missing, and my colleagues in the news business are missing, that we have a significant segment of the American public that wants white nationalist racism. I've literally had people call me on the phone and tell me what we need to do is bring back slavery. And this is not being covered the way I think it should be to really lay this bare. And related to that are all of the jello-spined Republicans who will not stand up to this man. More than 1 million people died for this country. I am, under the law, a war orphan because of World War II and the Nazis. And to see a politician more concerned about holding on to his office than the welfare of this country, we should be shaming these people, shaming them for being cowards, for not doing what they know is right.
You know, it wasn't long ago before Republicans would shame them for it. Let me remind you all of Steve King. Y'all remember Steve King? He was an Ohio Republican who got kind of ran out of town. Iowa. Sorry. I apologize, Ohio. Iowa Republican who got ran out of town, ran out of Dodge for saying things like this. Here is Steve King, and this was at the 2016 convention, the convention that nominated Donald Trump to be president.
This whole white people business, though, does get a little tired, Charlie. I mean, I'd ask you to go back through history and figure out where are these contributions that have been made by these other categories of people that you're talking about. Where did any other subgroup of people contribute more to civilization?
Than white people?
Than Western civilization itself, that's rooted in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and the United States of America, and every place where the footprint of Christianity.
Tom, he also asked, when did this phrase white nationalism get such a bad rap? He's now campaigning with Vivek Ramaswamy. Quite ironic, but he is.
Yeah, you know, gosh, a couple of civil wars and a couple of world wars and few genocides, and suddenly racial superiority gets a bad reputation. Imagine. I think, again, you know, it's not that they don't know what they're saying. It's not that they mean something different by it. There are a lot of the language that's coming out of Trump now, I think, it has been put there, not just by him, but by the people who work for him, as a flag now to the base, as a flare, as a bat signal to the base to say, don't worry about any of the kind of backpedaling we might have to do once we get to the general election. We're totally with you. This is our, you know, we've got your back. And I think the particularly tragic part of this, you know, as David pointed out, that millions of people are buying into this, but for Republicans to keep on this, harping on this ridiculous notion of, well, you know, it's just the way he talks. Tim Burchett, you know, what's how the New York talk business. You could probably make that argument in 2015, 2016, as people did. He's just acting. It'll be different when he's in office. Even by 2018, 2019, he won't try and stay in office. He would never support a coup. Here we are in 2023. How many times does Donald Trump have to simply say it out loud before, you know, people, yeah. And I think David's point about the media is especially well taken, where people say, you know, he's not joking. He's not kidding around. This is exactly what he wants. And it's also exactly what millions of his voters want.
And David K. Johnson, I mean, people didn't believe it when Yeah, and well, David, people dismissed it when his dad got arrested at a Klan rally. So,
Yes, and even though we have solid evidence beyond any doubt of that published at the time, we really need to focus on people who don't know the stories, which is not people watching the show, but people they know. Because I think many people close themselves out. They watch news organizations or don't watch at all, where they're not hearing what's going on here. And the baseline should be, it is never appropriate for any candidate who's for president of the United States to propose that we lock people up without trial, that we shoot people if we want to, as in the Fifth Avenue statement. We do other things that are against our Constitution. And as Trump said, suspend our Constitution. We really need to work on making that totally socially unacceptable.
and then why is the media not doing that, Jelani? Because I don't see every single Republican walking out of the United States Senate and House building being asked, do you support the idea that immigrants are poisoning the blood of the country? Every Republican ought to be asked that, not just when they're on Meet the Press. What is the media? Why does the media still seem so timid to just confront this? A lot of the media so timid to confront it.
Sure. I mean, I think there's variations in different forms of the media and different kinds, but overall, we've presumed a couple of things. One is that the normalcy, the normalization thing that I talked about previously, we've also presumed a certain degree of infallibility of American democracy or impregnability of American democracy. And so the alarms, and I've had these conversations publicly and privately and with various people in leadership of American media, the alarms don't ring as loudly in the ears of our media establishment as they should. And so another thing that I think is important is that we should look at not how alarmed our media is, but how alarmed the media in countries that actually have experience with authoritarians is. Because they understand exactly where this rhetoric can go, what the implications of it are. And, when I talk with, my colleague Maria Ressa, the Nobel laureate, from the Philippines, and she's extremely alarmed about these things because she sees the parallels. And there are media people around the world who understand this.
Absolutely. It can happen. It can happen here, too, everyone. Jelani Cobb, David Cay Johnston, Tom Nichols, thank you very much.